Please do come forward and find some seats. So, MediaPost has been doing shows about, well, we do a lot of shows, as presumably many of you know, but we've been doing shows about the world of display, starting with something we called OMA Behavioral several years ago. There's a phone call coming in. You know, that's not supposed to happen to me. It's the first time ever, actually. I don't get many calls. So in any event, so we've been doing shows. We started with OMA Behavioral. When was that, Steve? 4 or 5 years ago? 6 years ago? And 5 years ago? 6 years ago? And we were quite sort of avant-garde, we felt at the time. I mean, behavioral targeting was a somewhat new subject at that time. And ours was the first ever show that was about that subject. But the show grew and prospered over time because, and then we had a companion show called OMA AdNets, which was about advertising networks. Those two shows grew sort of like crazy and morphed into shows about the whole world of display advertising and scientific marketing. They kind of, went way beyond what we thought they could become. So we actually were in a process over the last several years of trying to redefine how we talk about this aspect of the industry, sort of scientific marketing and real-time feedback and redeploying your assets quickly. So just recently, we think we figured it out. And that's the genesis of this show. And we've tried to, I think I mentioned this a little earlier, we've tried to define the problem upward to talk about data-driven marketing and not to talk in the narrow segments like behavioral targeting or data and targeting or other aspects. We actually have a companion show tomorrow, which you probably have all heard about, called RTB, OMA RTB, real-time buying. So that's also like it's a very powerful force right now, but it's also sort of narrow in that it's only about the process of buying in real time through, however they do it, all the data, and they make the audience buying, and I vaguely understand it all. We write about it, I read it, and I vaguely understand it. But there's a great deal of interest in that subject, but that's also a sort of narrow approach to the topic. So we recently, we've introduced this show, and we also last week introduced a new daily news publication we're calling RTM Daily, which stands for Real-Time Media and Marketing. So how many people in this room have seen it? It was just last week. Okay, well, look for it. You're probably all on a list that gets a chance to sample it. And it's our attempt to talk about not just the media buying and planning, not just real-time bidding or buying, but also about the whole process of deploying data and in real time to make all marketing smarter for the ultimate customer in the whole industry, which is the marketing executive. So take a look. Our leader in all of these shows, starting way back with OMA Behavioral and all the way through OMA Data and Targeting, which we still do from time to time, and our various display shows of one kind or another, and OMA RTB tomorrow, is Steve Smith, who certainly knows more about more subjects because he's actually a lapsed college professor and he actually studies stuff. So, and he writes every day for us in many ways. Is there anybody in this room who hasn't seen Steve Smith's byline? Please raise your hand, don't be afraid. Okay, well, good, there's one person, Steve, and probably others who wouldn't raise their hand. So Steve has programmed the show, he's programmed tomorrow's show, he's gonna be our MC for both days. We're delighted to be in his hands. Steve, come on up and take us away.
Good morning, everybody. There are, just in case you're not aware, there are, for those of you who are working here today and part of the show, there are power blocks on all of our, courtesy of our sponsor Newstar. Very convenient to have. There are power blocks on two, I think, on each of the tables. The frostbite stations, I'm not sure when they'll be here, but I hope soon. This is one of those days where I really wish I had a little bit more body fat. Also, cruel irony, there's ice water on all the tables. You know, isn't it bad enough? As Ken said, this really, it's a fascinating evolution that we've gone through. It'll be 6 years this July that we had our first OMA behavioral show at the Yale Club. And we saw the first inklings of how important this subject was then. We literally stuffed the room 6 years ago. I'll never forget that day. It was also the day that Dakota was sold to AOL just hours before we started, making a great topic for the day. In many ways, what we now call big data had some of its evolution back then. The kernel of some of these ideas really started back then. We were getting that first trickle of data that was based on ranges of new behaviors that we hadn't been able to track before. We were starting to see the ramifications of having that kind of data delivered in real time in segments that maybe we hadn't imagined before, revealing affinities that we hadn't really dreamt of before. Add to that a few years later, of course, something we're going to be talking about especially tomorrow, the torrent of social data. This new unstructured information about sentiment, about mood, about attitude, things that we really hadn't thought about measuring very much before, but we're starting to see piles of data that we needed to do something with and find algorithms to better understand and render meaning from. And then later, of course, real-time reporting and targeting, these mechanisms and the data dashboards that started evolving from them started to make sense of some of these piles of data. They started making the data points more meaningful and manageable even, although certainly not as manageable as they need to be. And the idea also that started to evolve and that we're really to the point now of, and I think we'll hear a lot of at this show, is that data is no longer siloed, no longer just a part of CRM, no longer just a part of ad targeting, but really something that has to inform all aspects of an organization, that's really going to be a part of company strategy, product design, customer acquisition, and even future expansion and investment. And we're going to be hearing a lot of that today. A lot of that really began 6 or 7 years ago with the digitization of behaviors and over the last decade of the technologies that help power them. And you don't need to look very far to see one of the best object lessons in where all of this leads, how much power there is in this. Monday's inauguration of President Obama capped what will certainly be a milestone in data-driven marketing. In many ways, the campaign that we saw over the last several years, really, building over the last several years, leveraged big data in a lot of the ways that we'll be talking about today. Both big and small in the ways in which it targeted in a very, very granular level, but also thought strategically about where to invest resources and where to get the most bang for the buck. It aggregated masses of data points from across multiple databases, offline and online activity, and allegiances, and better understood them. It tied it with public data records. Then it also tracked the behavior of its own list very closely, and often used those activities to trigger very specific and precise messaging that responded to certain kinds of activity. We were really seeing a lot of some of the basics of big data being put into play in that campaign, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it both in conferences like this for years to come and also probably in academia. And of course, as we know, the big data machine at Team Obama used this database to find and micro-target highly specific messaging and highly specific new constituencies that in many ways people hadn't targeted before. They found audiences, and they also knew how to use their resources much more efficiently than anybody ever had seen before in a campaign. And the team also knew from its own predictive modeling just where it could get the most bang from its buck, where it could give specific offers and make specific investments and see the most return, and where not to invest, so it didn't. So a lot of those themes that we saw in that campaign, we're going to hear today echoed in a lot of what we're going to be talking about, because they really outlined the contours of what data-driven marketing is about and what it can achieve. And I think we're going to hear a lot of those themes come up today. There's a lot of big talk about big data. That's where we are now today. In fact, there's a recent Direct Marketers Association survey of marketers that showed that 61% of marketers admitted that they either don't know or their company doesn't support a big data strategy, although the overwhelming majority of those marketers also agree that data certainly will improve their efficiencies. They just don't know how yet. Clearly, we're at a point where education is necessary, and that's one of the functions of this show right now. And as we'll see in a second in our keynote in our first panel, we're going to let me walk you through the day very briefly before we start. We're going to start from the top down. We're going to start with how the data revolution is really affecting how people conceive and deploy marketing, how they think about the way in which the organization can use data across it, and also some of the longer-term investments they'll make. But then we'll get into some of the particular contours of a data-driven marketing environment. We'll look at the ways in which data changes the way companies perceive of their customers. In particular, one of the most interesting aspects of big data is that even though it's big, it seems impersonal. In many ways, it leads towards a much more personable relationship with the consumer, a much more granular and one-to-one relationship that we maybe not have seen before, all that driven by a machine that seems, in many ways, automated and impersonal. We'll look at the very real problem of distinguishing good from bad data. That, after all, I think a lot of you are handling this as we move towards that next stage, away from the land grab of data and into a deeper understanding of what's good from bad, what's clean from dirty, what really makes sense, and where the investments really need to go. How we move from data being a big, how we make it a big pool rather than just a black hole of investment. The afternoon will get even more granular. The IAB will unveil its new study of social data and the best practices around it. And data, of course, poses some interesting challenges, especially for the core constituency of MediaPost, which is the agency, media buying and planning world, and also the creative world. How does data relate to creative? How does it relate to the agency structures and the agency relationship with brands? Does that change? We'll be taking that topic up. And then we'll tease out the value of predictive analytics, the area of big data that maybe that both goes big and small, can help aim companies towards larger long-term investments, but also show them how very specific offers can register well or ill with audiences and how they can have immediate effects. And then at the end, we will use something that we've been actually doing here at MediaPost since the first behavioral show, something we call Grill the Vendors, where we bring in a number of solutions providers to help take an emerging field and help us better understand what that supply chain looks like. Data has already created its own Luma chart of complexity in terms of startups and various pieces along the supply chain. We're going to bring at least 5 members together to start to help us understand what that chain looks like and how to make better sense of it. But we start with the brand marketer's perspective, and we start with a brand that's been scouting the contours of data-driven marketing in much the same way that this show is trying to, at least at this stage, try to chart the contours of what DDM really means and what are some of the main themes. Paul Markham is the global director, digital director of marketing and programming at GE. He has the distinct advantage of working for a company that not only has data reach globally, but also has it in a very specific way, often coming off of some of its own devices. Didn't you tell me that even jet engines cast off data? And almost all of the appliances that GE certainly is working on will be creating their own data exhaust soon enough. Paul is responsible for GE's online brand globally and for maintaining the company's content and web presence. As you'll see, he and GE are already developing protocols and disciplines for managing data across multiple silos and in the service both of specific ad campaigns, but also in developing marketing strategies and product. Paul is a true believer. He is also, in addition to his work at GE, he's also the founder of the New York Data Visualization and Infographics meetup. And I think, as you'll see, he and GE are really starting to get their arms around what the outlines of data-driven marketing is about. Please welcome Paul Markham.